So welcome, everybody. This is January 16th, and it is a joint meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee, as well as the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. And we are here to hear about the report that just came out about the Clean Heat Standard, or the Affordable Heat Act. And I think the first order of business is we'd like to just go around and do some introductions. I think our committees have some new folks, and actually yours is a new committee.
Brand new committee.
Yeah, so we're going to start with some introductions, and then we'll lay some expectations, or just some expectations for what is going to happen during this meeting. And then I think you've got some things to say, and then we'll get rolling. So I guess I'll start. Ann Watson, I represent the Washington district, and the chair of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee.
Senator Terry Williams, representing Rutland County, and I'm the vice chair.
Senator Seth Blumgratz, I represent the Bennington, one of the two senators from the Bennington Senate District.
Chris Morrow, representative, representing Wyndham-Windsor Bennington District.
Hi, Scott Beck, Senate Natural Resources and Energy, St. Johnsbury.
I'm Representative Dara Torrey, representing Washington 2 District.
Representative Bram Klepner from Chittenden 13, which is Burlington.
Ellen Cassiap is in Legislative Council, and I work on energy, among others.
Richard Bailey, Representative Lamoille 2.
Michael Southworth, representative Caledonia 2.
Representative Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Morning, everyone. I'm Senator Ruth Harding from the Addison District.
Representative Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Caledonia Essex District.
And I'm Representative Kathleen James from Bennington 4 District, and I'm chair of House Energy and Digital Infrastructure.
Great, thank you, everybody. And so just to talk a little bit about expectations, or start our thinking for this time, we're going to start with our Legislative Council to walk us through what is now Act 18, formerly known as S5, and just lay out what was in the bill, what was our charge. And then we're going to move to the chair of the PUC, Ed McNamara, to talk about this check back report on the Clean Heat Standard. And so we'll hear from that. And then just from some folks that were very involved in helping build this, from the Technical Advisory Group, as well as the Equity Advisory Group. And just so that everybody understands, and so that we're all on the same page, this is an opportunity for us to listen, to learn, to make sure that we understand what the bill was, that we understand, generally speaking, what is in this report, to understand the process. It's a time for us to just be receiving. And also, I just want to say, I am so grateful for all of the incredible amount of work that has gone into this report up until this point. And so this is also not really a time to be opining. I know there's a lot of thoughts or potentially strong feelings one way or the other about this as a bill, or as I should say, about Act 18. And so this is not a time for us to be sharing what we want to do about it. There will be time for us to do that. There will be a time to share your opinion about these things. But today is not a day that we're making decisions. We are just receiving. We are just learning today. So that's it for me.
Yeah, similarly, just wanted to thank everybody for being here. And as we all know, the materials from the PUC were just delivered last evening. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why Senator Watson and I thought it would be a good idea to hold a hearing so quickly. It's really just to ensure that we're starting from a place of shared dialogue. So basically, as clear as we can be, we wanted to get all of the legislators on both House and Senate side in the same room at the same time to hear the same information and then start kind of a shared conversation. Ultimately, I think that we all know that this work is really about climate resilience. And we're so used to thinking about climate resilience, I think, in terms of helping Vermonters respond to and adapt to severe weather. But this work is also really about economic resilience, basic household budgets. It's about trying to find a path forward to help all Vermonters heat their homes, right, in a way that's affordable and sustainable. And by coming together here today in a bit of a level setting and a listening mode, I really hope that we can acknowledge all the work that's going to be presented to us and start from a place of gratitude to everybody across the state who's engaged in this. So thanks for your expectations, Senator Watson. Happy to oblige.
Great.
And thanks everybody for being here.
Super. All right. And so with that, we're going to start with our Ledge Council. So take it away, Ellen.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. It's 9:20. And I want to keep the time in mind for the busy morning that we have. So I'm going to share my screen and present a PowerPoint. It is posted on at least the House Energy website. I didn't check Senate Natural. So you can follow along. It is the text of the statute as well as some of the language from the session law provisions of the law. Also posted on the House Energy website is the original white paper from the working group that developed the Clean Heat Standard and proposed it to the Climate Council. And so that was the basis years ago where this language originally came from. So in case you want to look at that at some point, it is posted. And so now I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I have a lot of slides. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but mostly it is just it is largely the text of the statute. I have condensed some of the things for, being expedient, but I'm going to talk to you about the big main components of the Clean Heat Standard, what was enacted, and be able to answer any legal questions for you. So there was a short title in Act 18 of 2023. Oh yeah, so it's Act 18 of 2023. It was called the Affordable Heat Act, but what it established was the Clean Heat Standard. So we got a lot of names going on here. There's a findings section that references the Global Warming Solutions Act findings related to the effects of climate change in Vermont, as well as the greenhouse gas reduction requirements in the Global Warming Solutions Act. It also references the Climate Council and the Climate Action Plan, and specifically that the plan did call for the PUC to administer a clean heat standard. And that was based on the work the Climate Council had done on that white paper I mentioned. It also specifically mentioned that this was a great opportunity to use the IIJ federal funds that relate to a lot of the work being done under this bill. Section 3 and then Section 6 are the biggest parts of the actual act. Section 3 created the statutory framework in Chapter 94 of Title 30, and I'm going to go through that now. So there is an intent section 8121 that lays out what the intent of the bill was. But section 8122 is sort of a summary section. I think it's important because it lays out the primary components in a pretty succinct way. So the Clean Heat Standard is established. Under this program, obligated parties shall reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and they do this by retiring required amounts of clean heat credits. And they're doing this to meet the thermal sector portion of the greenhouse gas emissions required under the Global Warming Solutions Act. By rule or order, the PUC shall establish or adopt a system of tradable clean heat credits that are earned from the delivery of clean heat measures that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll talk about this more later, but there is a new tradable commodity established in this bill that are the clean heat credits, and you earn credit when you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so the credit is a reflection of the emissions that have been reduced by the action. An obligated party shall obtain the required amount of credits through delivery of eligible clean heat measures by a default delivery agent, unless the party receives approval from the PUC to use another method. So there is an entity created under this bill called the default delivery agent that is the default to do clean heat work on behalf of the parties. However, it does give the parties the ability to opt out and do their own work. And so again, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then finally, the PUC shall adopt rules and issue orders to implement and enforce this program. So there are a lot of definitions in this chapter, but two that I thought were important to at least talk about quickly. So number 13 is thermal sector. So thermal sector is used a few times in the statute, but it is important to know that it is the same definition as residential, commercial, and industrial fuel use sector that is used in the Vermont greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecast. It does also say, though, that it doesn't include non-road diesel or any other transportation fuel. And so this is to line up with the measurements of the data that are in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and forecast, which is how we know what the emissions are for the state of Vermont. Excluding transportation fuels is easier said than done, but there was an acknowledgement that this really is supposed to be about thermal building usage. And then the other definition that's very important is obligated party. And so it's who under this statute has to comply. So obligated party means a regulated natural gas utility serving customers in Vermont. There is one, it's Vermont Gas Systems. But then for other heating fuels, it's the entity that imports heating fuel for ultimate consumption within the state, or the entity that produces, refines, manufactures, or compounds heating fuels within the state for ultimate consumption within the state. So for this this means the entity that imports heating fuel is the entity that imports heating fuel is the entity that has ownership title to the heating fuel at the time it's brought into Vermont. So the analysis looks at who owns the heating fuel when it crosses into Vermont for consumption in Vermont. And there are multiple structures for the way that heating fuel, people who sell heating fuel have different models for their businesses. And so different people own it at different times. And so that means that not all heating fuel dealers are an obligated party under this structure. It's who owns it when it crosses into the border. All right. 8124 is sort of the biggest section in this chapter, or one of the biggest. It establishes the compliance for the clean heat standard. Section A is about the required amounts, which is arguably sort of the core of what's happening here. So it directs the PUC to establish the number of clean heat credits that each obligated party is required to retire each year. So each entity that imports fuel into the state will have a certain amount of credits they will need each year based on the amount of fuel they sell, which corresponds to how many emissions from the fossil fuel sector for the thermal sector. So the size of the annual requirement shall be at a pace sufficient for Vermont's thermal sector to achieve the life cycle carbon dioxide equivalent emissions reductions consistent with the Global Warming Solutions Act. So the PUC needs to set an amount of credits that each party needs to retire each year based on the Global Warming Solutions Act requirement that the emissions in Vermont go down over time. So the annual requirement is expressed as a percentage of each obligated party's contribution to the emissions based on the previous year. The annual percentage shall be the same for all obligated parties, and they shall publicly provide a description in plain terms. So I have not looked at the report that came out, but hypothetically, it's the idea that based on the amount of emissions reductions that are required under the Global Warming Solutions Act, all parties need to reduce their emissions by the same percentage each year. So across the board, it would be like 3% or 5%. That would be a different amount for each person because they each have a different amount of fuel that they sell each year, but they'll have a percentage that they need to reduce each year, their emissions, and that will correspond to how many credits they need to acquire each year. The PUC has to establish the credit requirements for 10 years at a time, updating it every 3 years, looking at the data to see if the amounts need to be adjusted. They also have the ability to waive the requirements for good cause if something happens, like there's a shortage of credits or market conditions or undue financial impact on customers. And I'm gonna have to speed it up because, but there is a lot in the statute. It's very detailed. Every year, starting last year, January 31st of 2024, all fuel sellers needed to register with the PUC, and there was information in the statute, the types of information that they needed to provide. And then every year thereafter, June 30th, they need to continue to register. And based on the information that they provide, the PUC will determine which of those entities qualify as obligated parties. So it is a registration for the whole universe of fuel sellers, but then the PUC will identify which of them are actually obligated under the statute to acquire credits. There are provisions for early action credits and credit banking. But then also there is this provision in D, the equitable distribution. So in addition to the specific amount of credits that they need to acquire each year, 16% of those credits need to come from work from clean heat measures from low income customers. Another 16% need to come from customers with low or moderate income. And so there's a 32% of their credits each year have to come from low and moderate customers. So that there is a focus on work being done with those households. Additionally, half of those credits need to come from installed measures. And so there are two sort of types of clean heat measures. There are the provision of fuels that have less emissions, like biofuels or renewable gas. But there are also measures that are installed measures, like weatherization of the home or clean heat or cold climate heat pumps, hot water heater pumps. So there are the installed measures or the provision of fuel. So half of those credits have to come from measures that are actually installed in the homes to ensure that work is done in low and moderate income households. The PUC has enforcement authority, and there's a non-compliance payment if a entity fails to require all their credits for a year. So then the next big part of this statute is the 8125 establishes the default delivery agent. So this program set up that the PUC is going to hire an entity to do statewide clean heat work. They have to provide a variety of clean heat services. They can't do sort of just, they can't just be like someone who installs heat pumps only. They need to do a variety of activity. And the reason is because the default is that the obligated parties will pay a credit fee to the default delivery agent to accomplish the work that will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So the PUC has appointment authority to by either order or contract hire an entity to do this work, and they will supervise this entity. So the default is that all parties will pay their credit fee to the default delivery agent, who will then use that money to do clean heat work in homes. But there is the option for the entity to tell the PUC that they have another plan. So they can opt out by giving the PUC notice that they either intend to do clean heat work themselves, either by selling biofuels or natural gas, or that they have diversified their business to include the installation of heat pumps, et cetera, or that they have contracted with an entity to do that work for them, like they have a cooperative agreement with someone, or that they intend to attempt to buy credits on, or that they intend to buy credits on the clean heat credit market. The PUC is to work with the DDA to establish a budget. They have until September 1 of this year to establish the budget, which means before September 1, 2025, the PUC will need to have hired the entity to be the default delivery agent. And then they will have the ability to revise the budget based on what the actual required amounts are per year and how many of the obligated parties are actually going to be using the services of the default delivery agent. So then there is a rulemaking provision here in 8126. The PUC does have the authority to adopt rules. They were required to adopt rules on this program and has the authority to issue orders. So throughout the statute, there are a few references to the types of parts of this program that the PUC can issue orders on. Orders are different than rules. Generally under statutes, agencies have the authority to issue rules when they've been enabled to do so by the General Assembly. But there is a very defined and prescriptive set of procedural steps that an agency needs to follow when they're adopting rules. And the PUC is one of the few agencies that actually have a separate thing that they do called issuing orders. Orders are usually procedural documents, and they can be issued very quickly. They can be issued basically at any time without the procedural steps that are required for rulemaking. So it's a practical way for the PUC to make updates to things that are, developing quickly over time. And so there's a few of the components of this plan that you did give them authority to issue via order, including the default delivery agent, which I just met. Doing contract negotiations with an entity could be difficult if you require them to do that by rule, but having them do it through order is a more practical way to do that. But there is some language in here in C that does say if they revise any parts of the rules with order, by an order, they have to take these extra steps of providing notice of the proposed change, 30-day comment period, respond to the comment, and provide language access services on it. And then any of those orders are appealable to the Supreme Court. I do think this is an important concept that I'm happy to answer questions about, but I have to get through a few more slides, and I'm also happy to come back to these committees at any time. There's a lot to cover in this program. 8127 establishes the tradable clean heat credits. If you have any familiarity with renewable energy credits, it's a very similar concept. When you generate energy, if it is renewable, it has the attribute of both being energy, but also being renewable. And so you generate a credit for it being renewable. Here, we're creating this new type of credit that reflects the amount of greenhouse gas emissions reductions are accomplished by the action you're taking, either providing that biofuel or by installing a heat pump or other type of appliance. And so this is new. There aren't any other states that use this program, so this is a new instrument for use in Vermont. There's provision in here for how the PUC can set up this program. So they need to set up a system that will provide a process for recognition, approval, and monitoring of the clean heat credits. The Department of Public Service is to perform verification of an evaluation of clean heat credits. There is also the question of who owns the credit at what point. The PUC was directed to establish how to determine who owns the credit. Is it the person that installs the appliance? Is it the person who owns it or pays for it? So there's a decision that needed to be made in the rules on that. Credit values. So the value of the credit is to be based on the accurate and verifiable life cycle carbon dioxide equivalent emission reductions in Vermont's thermal sector. So for measures that are installed, it is based on the expected lifespan of the measure. And so one of the things that the PUC was to work on with the technical advisory group and the consultant hired under this program was to determine what the lifespan was for some of these technologies. And so for fuels, you get credit for that year that the fuel is used, but it's only used once. But with an installed measure, it's used multiple years, 10, 15 years. And so it will generate credits for each year that it is in service. Here's the initial list of eligible clean heat measures. Additional technology may come online to add to this list, but weatherization, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, solar water systems, advanced wood heating, district heating, biofuels, green hydrogen, replacement of a manufactured home with a high efficiency manufactured home, and line extensions that connect facilities. So there are entities doing this work that are not necessarily fuel dealers. There are a lot of contractors who are already doing this work. Efficiency Vermont does a lot of work on this. And so those entities that are already doing this work will be generating credits, and will have the ability to register their credits in the system and sell them on the market, which is an option for the obligated parties to use. They could be looking to see who is generating credits and who they could be buying credits from. For renewable natural gas to count under this program, the obligated party has to have the full contractual pathway, demonstrate that they have the gas from the point of injection to the through the rest of the system. Can I do a time check on what you're thinking of how long I should go?
So if we were sticking to the regular agenda, you'd have 5 more minutes. However, well, how much more do you?
I can
I'm on a.
skip ahead a little bit. 'Cause
Okay.
the credits, there's a lot of information on how the technical advisory was to evaluate the credits and what kind of information they would need to make the determination for their value. But I can skip ahead to the other legal aspects of this program that I think you maybe want to hear from me. So 8120 established a technical advisory group, which is a group of 15 members that were appointed to assist the PUC with this long list of tasks. And I do think you're going to be hearing more about them later, but this is a group of people who have some relevant expertise and experience in this area to assist the PUC in making some of the decisions related to this program. And they also hired a third-party consultant to help assist in developing the information regarding the clean heat credits and how much everything is worth. Also, 8129 established a Clean Heat Equity Advisory Group. This is a 10-member group. They did also issue a report on the work that they did. And this is the list of tasks that they were supposed to assist the PUC with. But they were there to assist with making sure that the measures are delivered to Vermonters with low and moderate income in an equitable way, and to make sure that those low and moderate income customers who were not early participants were not negatively impacted by fuel prices. And so they had a list of things that they were also working on with the PUC. And this is a temporary group that will cease to exist after the first set of rules are adopted. All right, now for some of the fun stuff. So 8131 is a rulemaking authority provision. And so it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, the PUC shall not file proposed rules with the Secretary of State implementing the clean heat standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. So you enacted this statute and required that the PUC adopt rules implementing all of the details of this program. So the clean heat standard is established in statute, but it is pretty high level. Some of the things are detailed, but a lot of details are missing from the statute that need to be filled in before anything could actually happen. And so that needs to happen in the rules and orders issued by the PUC. But you pass this very odd provision that prevents them from actually fully adopting the rules without your explicit authorization enacted. And so what that means is that I'll talk about it a little bit more in the next slide, but you require that they present the final rules to you as opposed to going through the standard rulemaking process, and that there needs to be specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly in order for the rules to take effect. And so enacted means to become law through going through both House and Senate, both chambers of the General Assembly, and presentment to the governor. And so it needs to go through the full bill process in order to be legal. And so the authorization needs to be a bill passed by both houses, by both chambers, and sent to the governor for signature, without signature, or veto. Come on. Section 4 and 5 had some additional info. There's some clarifying language to the greenhouse gas inventory, and then there's an info sharing agreement with the tax department so that the PUC can ask for some information to verify the information that fuel dealers have given them. But now section 6 is the other big one. So they started the rulemaking development process in August 31, 2023. They have a facilitator to do the public engagement process. I hope you're going to hear more about that because you did have a pretty prescriptive public engagement process for them to follow. They had to use money on advertising. They had to provide you with draft proposed rules or to the public as well. So there was a 30-day comment period on the proposed draft rules, and that was back in October. They had to hire a consultant. They had to file a funding report describing how this program was going to be funded. And that's because the PUC is largely self-funded by the other work that they do. They receive very few general fund dollars. So that was a report that came out last year. And then the final rules. So on or before yesterday, the PUC was required to submit proposed final rules to the General Assembly. The PUC shall not file the final rules with the Secretary of State until specific authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. And so filing with the Secretary is one of the last steps before a rule becomes effective. And so again, this is the second time it's saying that the rules cannot happen until the General Assembly passes a law saying they can do so. And then sections 2 and 3 waive some of the steps of the regular rulemaking process. And that is because you provided a pretty specific set of public engagement that they had to do, which is sort of redundant, but over and above what is required for general rulemaking. And so some of those rulemaking steps are waived in 2 and 3. And then once the rules are adopted after the first time, they can follow the standard rulemaking process. But then 5 is the other big part of this. The final proposed rules shall contain the first set of annual required amounts of obligated parties. So the amount that they have to, the amount of credits that they need to have each year in order to comply with the program needs to be in the first set of rules. They shall only be adopted through the rulemaking process, not through an order. So this is to clarify that the primary component of the clean heat standard needed to be in this final set of rules. They cannot adopt it via order because without this, the rest of the program won't actually function. So while they are able to take action via order for a few things like hiring the default delivery agent or establishing the credit system, those things don't matter if there's no actual requirement established for the parties to comply with. So without the General Assembly adopting a new law authorizing this to move forward, there is no obligation to retire any credits on the parties. And there's some check back reports that have already come back. There you go. That's the end.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Rockstar for being able to make your testimony compressible. So thank you. I know there may be some clarifying questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Senator Watson. I do have one clarifying question. I just wanted to make sure that I correctly understand that it's my understanding that the legislature, now that the rules have been delivered, is not obligated or required to take any action.
Legislatures can't bind, future legislatures can't ever make a legislature do anything. But what this did was direct the PUC to undertake all of this work and say that they cannot move forward until you do something, but it does not provide any deadline by which the General Assembly has to take any action.
Thank you.
That being said, I'll just say there are multiple references to this program being set to assist in meeting the 2030 Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. So that I haven't looked at how the report is structured, but I think a lot of the language aimed at this is something that is intended to help reach that requirement. So it doesn't say when you have to act, but I think there's a suggestion.
Go ahead.
In that scenario where the General Assembly doesn't act, we still have a whole pile of distributors out there that are, selling these types of fuels. They've been required to register and some haven't registered. I understand some of them may be facing fines if they don't register. If we don't even vote on this, what happens to all those, if we don't vote today, that's fine. Like you said, we could vote a year from now, 2 years from now. Does that whole registration requirement and everything remain in place for all these distributors?
The registration requirement does remain in place, yes. It's in the
Okay.
statute.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Oh, yes, go ahead. Senator Williams.
Question, is natural gas companies included in that list of?
Yes. Yep, Vermont Gas System is one of the obligated parties.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay. Thank you so much, Ellen. So grateful. Okay, and so next we're going to invite up the Chair of the Public Utility Commission, Ed McNamara, and to tell us about this report. Okay. Okay. Great, thank you. I'll let you introduce yourself. You were here for our introductions, and then I'll let you take it away. Great, thank you.
Thanks. Excuse me. So I'm Ed McNamara. I'm Chair of Public Utility Commission. I know we're going to do a sort of PUC 101 for the different committees later, but basically we're the regulatory body that receives monopoly utilities, such as the electric utilities, Vermont Gas. We also have some oversight over telecommunications, cable, and some water companies. One important point, I'm one of 3 commissioners. All 3 commissioners, or at least 2, need to act or need to make a decision. So what I'm doing here today is trying my best to be consistent with the report that we submitted at 11 o'clock last night. So please bear with me. Hopefully I'm consistent with all that. If I say something that's slightly inconsistent with the report holds. So just to be really clear. All right. So Ellen did a great job walking through the statute, and she actually covered a lot of what we already have in the report, what the rule requirements are, a lot of these other aspects. I will also note, though, that when we're talking about clean heat standard, there's a couple other states that are looking at clean heat standard. None of them are internally consistent with each other or with Vermont. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing. They're all just sort of, it's a little bit of an experimentation process at this point. So when we talk about clean heat standard, it's not some monolith. It really is sort of whatever you decide it wants to be. So I want to put that out there. Talk a little bit about the charge from the legislature. Hasn't come up today, but I've seen it in the past. We were not asked to do a study of the clean heat standard. We were given a design of a clean heat standard and told to build it, and then simultaneously evaluate the economic benefits and costs associated with it, and also identify any potential problems. So that's what we're designed to do. This isn't a comprehensive review of the thermal sector by any means. It really is building a clean heat standard and then sort of taking a look at it while we're building it. So Ellen mentioned a little bit of some of the resources we had. The legislature appropriated about 1.75 million. That's for the commission and for the Department of Public Service collectively. We hired 3 staff members. The funding for those positions was FY24. And so we're able to keep them on the payroll. But as of the end of June, we don't have funding for any thermal positions just going forward. So it's just another issue about what happens if the legislature does nothing. The capability that at least the commission developed over the last 18 months effectively goes away. Ellen mentioned the technical advisor, or sorry, a technical consultant, separate from the technical advisory committee. Opinion dynamics, they characterize the clean heat measures. And what that means is basically what's the greenhouse gas reductions associated with heat pumps, weatherization, other different types of technologies. I'm going to note that this is the first time I believe that a statute has required that we look at the life cycle emissions of a technology. That's something new. Typically, we just look at total GHG emissions. So there's a little bit of a difference there. We also were directed to hire a public engagement consultant, and we hired Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity. They reached out, and what we really tried to do, instead of just going out and saying, okay, anybody wants to show up and come talk at us, we hired somebody to actually go out and try to identify groups that don't show up and don't have the resources, don't have the time. So our consultant went out and did that. It was a little challenging because it's difficult to explain the clean heat standard, especially when you're trying to do it at night in a public hearing with folks who don't typically engage with us. So that was an interesting challenge. Just wanted to flag that. And then the other aspect that our folks did is they helped staff the equity advisory group, the technical advisory group. And I also want to note that they did an enormous amount of work. And really appreciate everything that those groups did. And I know Mia and Rick are here to talk about that. So I'm just gonna thank you. Let's see. Most of our process we actually did through written filings. And so essentially we'd say, hey, this is the concept. Here's some general thoughts. Any ideas? Give us some feedback. There's maybe a dozen or so hardcore folks that would regularly participate in those would regularly provide that kind of feedback. It wasn't an enormous group, it was relatively small, but we'd get feedback from different groups, try to work through some of the issues, most of it through written, and then obviously the work of TAG as well. So we also drafted a rule outlining the requirements of the obligated parties, had a technical workshop, public hearing, and issued lots and lots of orders, making technical determinations that aren't really suited for a rule. I'm going to skip over the rule because I don't walk through all the different components of it. I guess there's one or two aspects that I think are most relevant. Ellen mentioned who owns the credits. That is something that a lot of people had a lot of opinions on. What we decided is for installed measures, these are heat pumps, weatherization, whoever owns the building that measure is being installed in actually owns the credit. And the reason for that is there's incentives to install these measures, but they don't cover the full costs. And so most of the cost of these measures is actually being borne by the owner of the building. So we decided the owner of the building should get the credit. But we also contemplate that whoever is actually installing it is working with the owner to provide some level of installation or some level of incentive so that they then get the credit. And we're leaving that open, and we expect that to be a little messy in the first couple of years because you have Efficiency Vermont and the distribution utilities providing incentives for heat pumps, for example. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the first year or two. For situations where you have the entity, when you have, for example, the weatherization assistance programs, they're providing 100% of the incentives, and therefore they actually get the credits. And part of that is to ensure that the funding is going to the WAPs as well, to make sure the money's going where it really should go. For biofuels, it's the heating provider that gets the credit. And then there's a third category called custom measures. That's essentially if you have a sugar house and VE Vermont Electric Co-op decides to run a distribution line so that you can switch from diesel to electric to power the sugar house or the sugaring operation, then VEC and the sugaring operation sort it out. And if there's problems, we get involved. So that's who owns credits. Let's see. I do apologize. We finished this up around 11 o'clock, so it's still reading this morning. Let's see. This is actually not in the rule. This is a determination that we made. Ellen mentioned that we have to do a determination of obligated parties. Believe there's about 90 obligated parties. And in our determination, what we said is we do not have enough information. We know that it's wrong, our determination, and we don't really have great means to figure out how to make it accurate. The amount of data out there, the heating market is incredibly complex. There's a lot of different actors, and especially for the definition of obligated parties, where it's who brings fossil fuels into Vermont and then also who sells it or within Vermont, makes it interesting because you can have, for example, one company going to New Hampshire, picking up fuel, bringing it into Vermont. That company then sells to 3 different companies, one of whom then brings it back to New Hampshire to sell it to residences in New Hampshire. We don't have great information to be able to dig into this, and heating market currently is vastly different than the electric side, where we have well over 100 years of history of regulation. The utilities know exactly what to do, when to do it, the reports, what report to look at. We don't have that, and so we're going to need to build that up. So determining the obligated parties is going to be challenging, at least under the current construct that are out in Act 18. In terms of the percent reductions, so from 2026 to 2029, obligated parties have to reduce their GHG emissions by roughly 10% year over year. Starting 2030, it actually drops to about 4% year over year through 2035. We only looked out for about 10 years. The reason for that change is Global Warming Solutions Act. 2030 requirement is just much closer than 2050. So the ramp up to 2030 is a lot steeper than it is to 2050. So that's why some of the numbers might look a little bit odd. Let's see. We do still have some work left to do on clean heat standards, not a full program yet. One of the requirements is developing a system of tradable credits. Concern that we had working through this is what tradable credits means can vary drastically depending on what kind of program you have. Ellen mentioned renewable energy credits in the electric sector. That you have fully liquid market with hundreds, if not thousands of entities trading in real time. Developing a platform like that is going to be either extremely expensive for us to develop it in-house, or we can team with, there's a couple of companies. The one that I've talked to at least once is MRETS. They're out in the Midwest. They've started doing a little bit of thermal tracking. We could work with them, and it would essentially be the obligated parties would pay about $2,500 a year to register the credits and work with them. The other possibility is to simply have a tradable system where it's an administrative tracking system. Essentially, it's a big database. If you have something like that, it's not really a liquid market anymore. In order for us to maintain a database like that, we'd have to allow trading only during certain times. At least that's one way. We can't have folks just waiting for trades to come in and then tracking immediately. So part of it is understanding what you folks want. Do you want that liquid market? Do you want something that's more administrative? So we haven't actually done that yet. If we do the administrative, we're I assume that we'll just find a consultant in Vermont and build that system. We're going to need some funds to do that. Probably not enormous, especially compared to the cost so far, but some funds. The other piece that is, and Ellen mentioned this, default delivery agent. So we don't have a deadline for appointing a default delivery agent, but we do have September 1st to actually have to approve the budget for default delivery agent. We've done a fair amount of work to define what that actually means. What is the default delivery agent doing? One of the concerns that we have, there did not seem to be a lot of interest in anybody doing it, and I understand that. There's a lot of work to develop a proposal to be a default delivery agent, and given the uncertainty about this legislation, I don't know any company that would actually put something forward. So we should have discussions about what are the expectations of the default delivery agent. That is actually one other aspect that is still in statute. If you choose to do nothing, we still have an obligation to set a DDA budget by September 1st. It's not clear that we'd actually even have a DDA to set the budget. So just being clear about that. So economic analysis. Just want to make really clear, I'm a lawyer. I understand the basics of economic models. I did not do this model. We hired a consultant, and we have Commissioner Riley Allen, who used to design these kind of models, Tom Nauer, our policy analyst, they're really good, Jacob Davis. So there's a lot of folks who worked on this model, not me. So I'll give some high level. I want to start with, I want to heavily caution that costs and benefits are very, very difficult to estimate. So in addition to the assumptions around costs to incentivize clean heat measures, you need to assume a measure mix. In other words, how many heat pumps, how much weatherization, how much biofuels. We can assume that, and it's not going to be reality. Reality is always messier than you assume in a model. And so what we did is we looked at what the Department of Public Service potential study. When they did a potential study, they looked at optimizing the efficiency of measured mixes. So that's optimized, and we know that's definitely not going to happen, but we did that just to pick some measured mix. So also important to remember that clean heat standard is not occurring in isolation. We have weatherization assistance programs. We have the energy efficiency utilities in tier 3 of REDS. So the clean heat standard benefits and costs are all incremental to those programs. So in other words, the costs and benefits we're putting forward aren't costs and benefits associated with meeting Global Warming Solutions Act. It's the incremental to what we're already doing. So, and we do have total costs in there somewhere. But again, you're going to want somebody better at the economic model to come in and talk about that. So I'm going to give you throw out a couple of numbers. One big caveat. Sorry, first I should actually talk about just costs and benefits. When you talk about cost, the program costs, how much are the incentive levels? How much does it cost to actually run a program? And then you also have participant costs. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a homeowner, you're actually paying most of the cost for that heat pump. You're paying most of the cost for the weatherization. So those are called participant costs. Total costs are participant costs plus program costs. For whatever reason, we realized yesterday that we have the program costs clearly defined and not participant costs. So we have one side of the equation that is short on numbers, and we can come back with some better numbers, but the program costs alone are 956 million over 10 years. And that equates to, this is just for fuel oil, about 8 cents in 2026, increasing to 58 cents in 2035. That represents a 2% rate increase in 2026, increasing to about 45% in 2035. Rate increase of the cost of fuel oil. Also, as a side note, we used 10 years. We modeled out over 25 years. All models are wrong. The farther out you get from the start date, the more wrong it is. It's standard in all our planning that 20 years is sort of a statutory requirement, but we really only dig into the first 10 years. It's sort of a standard for us. So that's why we're giving you 10-year numbers. In terms of benefits, the benefit side has these few different aspects. People are going to save money if they reduce their fuel costs. In most cases, if you have oil and propane, you're likely to save money if you install a heat pump. If you have natural gas, it's going to cost you more to install a heat pump, your total heating load. But most of Vermont is actually not natural gas. Most of it is heating oil and propane. So in general, you've got the value of those decreased fuel costs. You also have the social value of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. I don't have this broken out right now, but the total of those two numbers is 1.5 billion over 1.5 billion over 10 years. So again, cautioning that's the total benefit. We don't have the total cost at the moment. I also want to note too that the measure mix heavily relies on biofuels. Biofuels are one of the less expensive clean heat measures, at least in the near term. And so that significantly dampens the cost. As you go forward, you're going to hear from a lot of folks who are going to tell you that biofuels should not be included in any program. So we heard that a lot. You're going to hear that a lot. And just want to flag that because it'll play into the costs of anybody. We also looked at some potential problems associated with clean heat. First one is definition of obligated party. Ellen walked through this. I mentioned this earlier, heating market, really complex. What we suggest is it would be far simpler if you took the entities that are paying the fuel tax and said, you're the obligated parties. The entities paying the fuel tax is whatever fuel dealer is delivering to your home. They're the ones paying the fuel tax. This is consistent with at least Massachusetts, who's also looking at the clean heat standard. They're not talking about imports. They're talking about who is actually delivering the fuel and making those folks the obligated parties. At least that's my understanding. I cannot find a citation to this, but my understanding is that Maryland is moving in that direction as well. They started with imports, and I think they've settled on whoever delivers. So look at the retail level, not the wholesale level. One problem that we also see is in terms of this import and sell within Vermont, there's not a lot of clarity in terms of a threshold. So theoretically, if you go camping in New Hampshire, buy a propane canister, use part of it in New Hampshire, I'm talking about camping, like a little 1 gallon, bring it into Vermont and then use it in a campground in Vermont, you are an obligated party under the clean heat standard. It makes absolutely no sense. And that's clearly not what was intended, but this language definitely needs to be tightened up. And in our view, just simply saying the fuel dealers, the ones who pay fuel tax, that gets rid of that whole problem. This isn't so much a problem. I just want to again note life cycle emissions. This is inconsistent with greenhouse gas inventory with any other sector within when you look at greenhouse gases. And it's also inconsistent with any of the current programs being delivered by the energy efficiency utilities, by weatherization assistance providers. They're not tracking on a life cycle. They're just looking at greenhouse gas, period. So going to wrap up quickly here. We did put forward some recommendations. We signaled some of this in our October 1st status report. So our overall conclusion after working on this for the last 18 months, Clean Heat Standard is not a fundamentally wrong program. We just don't think it's a good fit for Vermont. Part of the reason for this, we have weatherization assistance providers. I think there's 5 or 6 of those. Tier 3 of the renewable energy standard, that's 17 electric utilities delivering thermal benefits through Tier 3. Vermont Gas is one energy efficiency utility, Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric Department. They're all providing their own thermal programs. One quick side note though, and one disclaimer, none of these provide incentives for biofuels with the exception of advanced wood heating that I think it's mostly Vermont Electric and some of the small municipal electric utilities are providing through Tier 3. But I don't think there are any incentives for biodiesel, for example. So when I say that we're already providing these programs, not including the biofuels component here. So the main issue isn't whether we have the necessary existing programs, it's whether we have sufficient funding to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act requirement. So we put forward a couple of different ideas for this. One simple one that we proposed in 2021, increase the fuel tax. The other one that we actually sketched out a little bit more, we proposed this in 2021, we modified a little bit. The energy efficiency utilities are funded by an energy efficiency charge, something that the Public Utility Commission sets based on expected requirements. In other words, what's the electric potential out there? What does Efficiency Vermont need for a budget to go out and actually achieve those necessary reductions in electric usage? You can do the same thing on the thermal side. You can say, what do we need to meet Global Warming Solutions Act? What funding is necessary? And therefore, what is the rate that you would put on? So something very, very similar to energy efficiency charge. You could also, under the structure, similar to Efficiency Vermont, carves out certain companies. So Efficiency Vermont does not provide services for those companies. Those companies do their own energy efficiency programs. If you want to, on the thermal side, you could say some of the larger heating providers are not paying this thermal efficiency benefit charge. They're actually providing their own services. They're doing their own heat pumps. They're doing their own weatherization. And that was trying to honor the idea of not all heating providers under the clean heat standard need to simply cut a check to the default delivery agent. They can go off and do their own programs. So trying to come up with an analogy or try to be as close to that general concept as possible. I mentioned before, biofuels are not included in anything that we're doing at the moment. And so, but there are biofuel blending requirements in Rhode Island, maybe Maine, Massachusetts. There's a couple other states in the region that are doing biofuel blending requirements, and you ought to consider those as well. It'll help with costs. That's about it. And again, I'm usually more coherent than this.
You've done a great job. Thank you. Sorry, so we're going to open it up to clarifying questions at this point. Yes,
Sure,
Representative
thank you,
Campbell.
Senator Martin. I'm interested in a little bit more fleshing out of the energy efficiency charge idea and how that would apply to entities, dealers, fuel dealers. First of all, how I guess the PUC would set such a rate and how that would apply to dealers that are installing heat pumps, for example. You could kind of talk about that a little more.
Yes, so we very deliberately did not
I know
put a lot of flesh on the bones. And just to be clear, the reason that we did that is, at least from my perspective, I think you need to hear from all the different entities already delivering programs, hear from them first, and not have some energy nerd come in and tell you how to run your system. Like, you need to hear from the folks actually doing. So that said, I think of the heating providers here, sort of obligated parties or anybody who's paying the fuel tax would be the one paying the thermal energy benefit charge. The way that we would set that is we would look at what are the existing programs already doing? How much progress are we already making? And what's the delta between progress we've made and what we need to do under statutory requirements, Global Warming Solutions Act? We'd have to go through a similar process of estimating how many heat pumps versus other things. So it's not going to be a direct match. And I think it would be also asking all of the different current providers, the weatherization assistance providers, the EEUs, and the electric utilities. What are you seeing from your programs, and where do you think funding is necessary to actually get you over this hump, to get more savings? So we'd set the rate based on what we think the measure mix ought to be, what the cost is likely to be to get there. Money would be collected presumably by the tax department, since they're collecting the fuel tax and it's the same entities. It'd probably be the most efficient. Go into a pot, and then PUC or some other body can decide where's the money going to go? How much do we want to send back to, or how much do we want to add to weatherization assistance providers? Do we want to put more money there versus Efficiency Vermont or the electric utilities or something else? So that would be the concept. It's a very broad concept at this point, but it would be very similar to, at least I keep thinking that it's similar to the energy efficiency charge we currently have. The big question is, where does the money go? And it's who actually determines that. Under the way I've been thinking about it, it would be the PUC, but it would need a lot of guidance and public input, obviously.
Yes, Senator Beck.
I think you mentioned a social value of 1.5 billion. What would be an example of a social value?
So 1.5 billion actually has two different components. One is the reduced fuel cost for anybody, and that just reflects the fact that as people put in heat pumps, if you currently have oil and propane, you're likely to save money by putting in a heat pump. So part of that 1.5 billion, I apologize, I don't know off the top of my head what component.
Yeah.
Reflects savings for Vermonters. So that's actually sort of dollars saved. The other component is, it's called the social cost of carbon, and it is a way to reflect that there is societal value in reducing carbon emissions because and getting a little over my skis here, but because it reflects the fact that there's going, assuming that we meet all our GHG reduction requirements, there's going to be less damage, less significant storms, things like that. So social cost of carbon is something that the EPA came up with. The Climate Council adopted it. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but it's essentially, it's a construct. It's very commonly used in the energy efficiency space. They've been doing something equivalent to that for 20 plus years.
Okay. On the cost of Vermonters, does that include the installation, capitalized cost of the installation, or is it just on the operation?
This is just on the benefit side. So it's just the reduced cost on the operation.
On the operation.
Yeah, you're correct though, that and that's what I was trying to say earlier about, we have the program costs, how much it costs to provide incentives. We don't at the moment have participant costs. So if you put a heat pump in your house, it's going to cost you.
Yeah, it's a capitalized cost there.
Exactly.
Sure.
So we don't have that. And so that reduced energy cost needs to be paired with the increased or the cost of installation.
Okay.
Effectively net it out. That's what you should be doing.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was actually similar to Senator Beck's question. I was trying to understand how that the sort of benefit, the cost benefits, and I'm assuming somewhere in your massive report is a table or something that works out the money part of it.
There's a couple of tables in the report. Again, we're missing one component, and I'd love the opportunity to make sure that we have the folks who actually did the model and can really answer all the questions, provide much more detail than I'm able to, and that actually has a more complete set of numbers
Okay.
than we have currently.
That would be great in the future. And I also just want to say that I'm really sorry that you had to come in and give this report the day after. It was a little cruel. So thank you for all of your work and for showing up on a day that you're clearly tired from all of this massive amount of work. And thanks to you and your team for doing it all.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I also, I completely understand why we're doing it today. It was, my initial reaction was, you want me to do what? And after Chair James sort of walked me through it, I understand that. I think it's important to actually have this sort of level set. And I'd strongly encourage that we dig into this a little bit more and really hear from the folks that doing the work. So.
Yeah, it seems important to get out of this what we can, especially given all of the work that you guys have done. I don't want to waste your work.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We have another question over here. Yes, Representative Morrow.
Thank you. A couple of questions, actually. You mentioned, I think, $1.75 million. That's what was spent on your work to date?
That's what was appropriated by the legislature. And yeah, we probably spent a little bit more than that because we've carried some additional staff.
Right, okay. My other question is, you mentioned that if the legislature does nothing, that the default delivery agent work would have to continue. You have the September 1st deadline. What, if any, other components of this would you be obligated to continue working on if the legislature does not act?
Yeah, Ellen mentioned the registration, and that's, to me, the really big thing. That's an obligation on a lot of different folks. And then, so I'd strongly encourage looking at the registration piece. Default delivery agent, there is a weird quirk in the statute where the equity advisory group only ceases to exist if the rules are adopted. So if the rules aren't adopted, they stay in perpetuity, even as though they don't have a clear charge. It's kind of a weird little thing, minor, very minor. And then technical advisory group would stay sort of in perpetuity, even though there's not really. I mean, those are, to me, more administrative than substantive issues.
Thank you. I think there's another question over here. Representative Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. Representative, will you finish?
Yeah, thanks.
Representative Morrow, this question reminded me to ask you whether there are parts in the course of this examination, there were parts of the mechanism that you were putting together that seem worth keeping, even if the legislature doesn't approve the thinking standard going continuing.
Yeah, so you're catching me at a bad time on that, simply because we're focusing on sort of the reports. Looking back, yeah, it's not like we think Clean Heat Standard is a terrible program. The focus really is on, we have good existing work in Vermont, and do we need an additional layer on top of that? That's more the question. The other, and this is definitely not in the report, this is off the cuff by me, is you could do a Clean Heat Standard and get rid of the thermal side for energy efficiency utilities and reduce the tier 3 requirement. That's another option that in my mind it's not a crazy idea. My main concern is it's not just Vermont, but I think a lot of states have a tendency of like, we have a great new program, let's put this in, without really looking at the existing programs and whether they're still necessary under the new program. So that's, I guess, that would be my throwing that out. That's off the cuff. It's definitely not in the report. But yeah, there's the other piece too, is that if there was a regional market for clean heat credits, that makes it more attractive to Vermont. Vermont is too small to have a fully liquid clean heat credit market. Like, it's just, we wouldn't do it alone. if New York, Massachusetts, if there was a critical mass of other states where it actually made sense to have a market-based structure, then I think it would be much more attractive.
Thank you. Right, Representative Klepner.
Thank you. Among the alternatives, you mentioned increasing the fleet tax. And I wonder if you have a sense of how the increase in the fuel tax we would need to achieve our goals compares with the 8 cents a gallon ramping up to 55 cents a gallon in 2035 that you had mentioned under the clean heat standard.
I do not have a sense of that. We threw out some conceptual ideas that would need to be explored. We're not saying that these are the best alternatives. We threw out alternatives. And any of those ideas really the tires need to be kicked, and we need to have a lot of people in here to talk about whether they make sense. And yeah, essentially we had enough on our plate to build the clean heat standard and model that without moving into the other. So I just want to be really clear. It's not like we're pounding the table saying you need to do this alternative for anything else. So we're not there yet. We're recommending that you look at them up.
Thank you.
So I have one clarifying question myself. Under the potential alternatives that you mentioned, I think roughly the third one, you said something, I just think I just need you to say it again, so I apologize. Something about having large entities do it on their own. Can you just describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So on the electric energy efficiency, so on that side, you have something called an energy savings account program. And under that program, if there is, and it's usually larger commercial or industrial facilities that have their own facilities manager that does, so they're doing their own energy efficiency work. They essentially apply to be separate, somewhat separate from Efficiency Vermont. And so they do their own programs. They still rely on some technical advice from Efficiency Vermont. They still rely on Department of Public Service to do evaluation. So they pay, I believe it's about 30% of the energy efficiency charge that they otherwise would pay. It's a way to encourage the folks who are going to do the good work on their own to be able to continue to do that. So it's essentially taking that concept and putting that on the thermal side.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Yes, go ahead.
We got any idea that 1.7 million, that was your department to build your modeling and to start figuring this out, or is that both you and the Department of Public Service together?
That was us and the Department of Public Service together collected.
And have we got any idea how much a clean heat credit would go out on the market for?
We do not.
And how would that be determined?
In an ideal world, you actually have, well, a couple different ways. And one is for the PUC to just administratively set the price and say, this is what it's going to be. The other way is let the program go and see what the default delivery agent is willing to pay, whoever, Efficiency Vermont or Vermont Gas for their work, or installer of a heat pump for their work, and let the market decide. It's my guess, if clean heat standard goes forward, probably makes more sense for us to administratively set the price and then over time let a market develop. And I'm sure technical advisory group Rick Weston is going to definitely have some really good thoughts on that one. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? Of course, this is just the beginning of a discussion on this topic, so grateful. Please pass along our gratitude to everyone who worked on this from your department. So, and so with that, we are going to take a 10-minute break. Again, this is January 16th, joint meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee and the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. And we are coming back from a break, and we have Mia Watson here to tell us about the Equity Advisory Group and potentially their report. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I'm Mia Watson. I'm Special Programs Manager at Vermont Housing Finance Agency, where I oversee much of the agency's energy policies and programs. But here because I'm the chair of the Equity Advisory Group. Act 18 created the Equity Advisory Group and charged it with assisting the Public Utility Commission in developing a clean heat standard to equitably serve all Vermonters. EAG is a great group of people with extensive experience in the needs of low and moderate income households and delivering weatherization and efficiency programs. In addition to significant amounts of guidance produced by the group over the last year for the PUC, we also produced a final report for the legislature, which I understand you've received. Really proud to say that despite a difficult process of getting a report written by committee in a public meeting process, we unanimously adopted the suggestions in the report and I think produced a really comprehensive overview with a lot of suggestions for how to promote equity. The report acknowledges that the status quo that Vermont is currently facing is highly inequitable. In Vermont, higher income households use more energy and they produce more emissions than lower income households. However, the energy burden, the cost of paying for energy in relation to the total budget is much higher in low income households, and they're more likely to rely on expensive and price volatile heating fuels. National research shows that low income communities, especially those predominantly for people of color, are much more likely to see greater impacts of climate change. And we're really already seeing that in Vermont today in patterns of flooding, especially in our manufactured home communities, which have seen catastrophic. Research from Efficiency Vermont shows that the Vermont towns with the highest energy burdens, which also tend to be lower income communities, also have had significantly less adoption of cold climate heat pumps and other efficient technologies to date than higher income towns with lower energy burdens. The EAG felt that low and moderate income households are at high risk of being left behind in the climate transition and the trend towards home electrification. And this trend is occurring nationally and internationally, regardless of what Vermont does. And that's a real risk to our low and moderate income households and other disadvantaged communities. The report found that the Clean Heat Standard can offer some significant benefits, including net social and environmental benefits, which were predicted in the potential study that Ed described. And that over the long term, the Clean Heat Standard could help many households reduce their dependence on fossil fuels and save money heating their homes. In particular, the EAG's final report found that the Clean Heat Standard could be a reliable funding source for low-income programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program, which delivers free weatherization and efficiency services for low-income households. For reasons I'll discuss later on, we suspect that low-income credits that are obligated under the Clean Heat Standard are going to be more expensive and difficult to obtain, therefore making obligated parties rely heavily on programs like the WAP program to achieve those credits. WAP has seen really variable funding over the last several decades, which has made it difficult for them to reliably staff and keep experienced workers in their programs. And so having a reliable funding source over the long term could be really beneficial to the excellent work they do in helping low and moderate, low-income Vermont households. However, with that said, the EAG final report definitely outlines a lot of concerns we have over the Clean Heat Standard. The main concern we heard from many Vermonters was about the possible impacts on fuel prices. In the final report, which, as you know, was just delivered, in the final report from the PUC, which was just delivered, the prices that are predicted on fuels were lower than I think a lot of people expected when we sort of heard public comments. However, the EAG heard from many commentators that any increase in fuel prices would be very difficult to shoulder. Many commenters, especially those living on fixed incomes or living paycheck to paycheck, worried about this impacting their ability to stay in their homes long term. In the absence of finalized cost impacts up until this point, there was substantial fear and confusion about the unknown impact on the program on heating affordability for low and moderate income households. And as alluded to in the EAG final report, not having that price data was an important missing puzzle piece that made it hard for us to understand the holistic impacts of the clean heat standard. In any case, the EAG expects that obligated parties who are required to generate the clean heat credits are expected to pass on most, if not all, the costs of compliance to their fuel customers, who will ultimately experience the financial burden of the clean heat standards. Since low and moderate income customers tend to spend a much higher proportion of their budget on home fuel heating, any higher fuel costs will have a disproportionate impact on households with the least ability to absorb the costs. Another concern that's outlined in our final report is on the LIHEAP program. That's the low-income home energy assistance program that helps very low-income households heat their homes. So I'm not an expert in LIHEAP, but my understanding is that the LIHEAP assistance is based on the margin over rack pricing, which is the fixed price that participating fuel dealers can charge customers receiving fuel assistance funds. From what I understand, under Act 18, the margin over rack price is subject to the potential clean heat fee. So absent any changes to how the LIHEAP program is developed or the margin over rack price, not only will LIHEAP recipients experience higher base fuel costs along with all other customers, but LIHEAP dollars may not go as far as supporting those households. So in implementing the clean heat standard or any other programs, understanding how LIHEAP is impacted and how to shore up the program to support those very low income households, that's a high topic of concern for our group. Another issue flagged in the potential study prepared for the Department of Public Service and in our report was workforce. We also heard that echoed from people with on-the-ground experience, especially through the Weatherization Assistance Program. Vermont is short several thousand weatherization and clean heat technology workers, and I know that the state is already engaged in efforts to promote workforce development, but certainly achieving the goals under the Clean Heat Standard and Global Warming Solutions Act are going to be really challenging with our existing workforce. Our report also highlighted the limitations in the market-based approach in the Clean Heat Standard, which create significant equity challenges. So a market approach will inevitably favor the least cost measures because the obligated parties are for-profit businesses who want to find the lowest possible cost of obtaining the clean heat credits. However, work in older Vermont homes will often require expensive, costly repairs. Over a quarter of Vermont homes, or over 85,000 homes, were built before 1940. This is undoubtedly the lower end of potential estimates of homes that are really going to struggle with implementing clean heat measures like weatherization and heat pumps. The EAG report estimates that a project to install a heat pump and weatherize a single-family home could easily cost over $20,000 just for commonly encountered home repairs like vermiculite remediation and electrical panel upgrades. There's also additional less commonly encountered, but still frequently encountered issues like knob and tube wiring, lead paint, and other issues, structural repairs that have to happen before any upgrades like weatherization and heat pumps can proceed. However, under the Clean Heat Standard, the credits that are produced are strictly tied to emissions delivered. That means that under the Clean Heat Standard, there's absolutely no economic value related to the home and the home repairs. So obligated parties are not going to be very quick to do programs like home repairs if there's any other way of obtaining the credits that they're required to. I'm sure that this will still happen to an extent under programs like the Weatherization Assistance Program, but especially in the early years of the program, obligated parties are going to try to find the cheapest ways of doing these. And that means that homes that are older or occupied by lower income households are going to be sort of last on the line of projects that you'd like to invest in if you're able to make a choice. There's also no guarantee that homes will be weatherized before heat pumps are installed. Experts, definitely advise that weatherization should happen before installing a heat pump, so you're not just sort of blowing hot air into an unsealed space. But weatherization isn't likely to be the most cost-effective way to generate clean heat credits. You could install a heat pump and get the credits for those savings rather than do weatherization, which, you have to think of it in terms of not just the value to the household that's experiencing the benefits, but the value to an obligated party who wants those credits. So we think that could be a major challenge in the Clean Heat Standard, doing the types of activities that Vermont wants to do as a policy goal and a way to help low and moderate income households. We also felt that there was significant risk of unequal access to the clean heat measures available under the clean heat standard. Low-income households, moderate-income households, renters, residents of mobile homes, and Vermonters of color are all likely to struggle in different ways to access those measures in their homes. We discussed this a lot throughout the report, so I'll just cover some of the highlights, but it is extensive in the report. There's particular concern about low-income households. The report estimated that there are about 78,000 Vermont households earning at or below 60% of the area median income. So that's low income under the clean heat standard. That's about a third of all Vermonters. At the state level, 60% of area median income is about $49,200 for a two-person household. And that will be adjusted based on the household size and what county you live in. Renters, low-income households are far more likely to be renters, and they're far more likely to be people of color than other demographic groups. So in the report, we acknowledge that there's a lot of overlap to being parts of the different demographic groups that we expect to struggle under the clean heat standard. Low-income households are more likely to live in older homes, which are more likely to need repairs. And even when homes don't require repairs, full decarbonization of a home can easily cost over $28,000 for weatherization and multi-zone heat pumps in a single family home. And that's kind of a good case scenario if your home isn't sort of set up really strangely and broken up into lots of little rooms, which a lot of our older homes have. So $28,000 is a lot more than what a lot of low and moderate income households can afford, even after the sort of the generous incentives that we're currently seeing from our energy efficiency utilities. Low-income households tend to have, really low debt capacity, so they tend to need really deep incentives or often the full cost of weatherization measures covered by someone else if you want to get into those homes. So that means that we thought it was very unlikely that installed measures in low-income homes, besides the 8% that's required under the clean heat standard, are likely to occur. So because of the economic incentives in the clean heat standard, we're expecting really the minimum of that activity for low-income households to occur under the clean heat standard. Another issue that we flag in the report is renters' access to clean heat measures. About 27% or 72,600 households in Vermont are renters. Only 23% of renters have all the utilities included in the rent. And we suspect that a significant portion of those households are probably households in subsidized affordable housing because it's much more common to have all the utilities covered. Because of this, we're expecting that most renters are facing what we call the split incentive. That means the benefits of energy efficiency, like reduced utility costs and greater comfort in the unit, are enjoyed by the tenants. But the economic cost of those incentives are borne by the landlord. You could always price it into the rent, but there's not a clear connection between investing and benefits, which is why we call it the split incentive. The misalignment of financial costs and benefits has been really demonstrated to discourage landlords from investing in energy efficiency improvements in rental properties. This is especially true in our very tight housing stock. There is very little incentive to weatherize a home because landlords know that they can find a tenant to fill a unit really easily in such a tight housing market. We also don't have code enforcement for weatherization and efficiency. Our rental health and safety code really just requires sort of basic habitability, the ability to keep the unit at a reasonable temperature, but certainly not any obligation to help renters save money through efficiency and utility costs. So under the clean heat standard, it's going to be a real challenge to get landlords and renters involved in this program. There's no sort of direct pathway to encourage that to happen. Another issue of great concern for the EAG was manufactured or mobile homes. There are an estimated 20,000 mobile or manufactured homes statewide, which is about 6% of all the state's housing stock, and many of those are occupied by renters as well. Vermonters who live in manufactured homes are disproportionately lower income, and they often use kerosene for heating. Kerosene is one of the most expensive, price volatile, and carbon-intensive heating fuels, but residents rely on it because they have the tank in the building outside, and so you need a fuel that won't gel or start to freeze up when it gets cold. So that really has locked a lot of manufactured home residents into kerosene. So any impacts in kerosene are really going to be disproportionately felt by that group under the clean heat standard. Up to a quarter of the state's manufactured housing stock was built prior to 1979, And that was before minimum health and safety requirements for manufactured homes were established under HUD. We heard from the Weatherization Assistance Program and experts on the EAG with experience that many older manufactured homes face structural and technical limitations that make installing clean heat technologies like heat pumps challenging or impractical to install. They don't have basements. There's a real risk of pipes freezing if you don't do it correctly. And a lot of them have outdated electric systems. So it's an uphill battle doing weatherization in manufactured homes. And from what I understand, that expertise is heavily concentrated in the WAP program. There's not very many private contractors who are serving manufactured home residents because of that skill set and the fact that many of them are very low income. A lot of manufactured homes simply cannot support new investments. The EAG report used tax department data from a mobile home report that was made to the legislature to estimate that there are at least 4,600 mobile homes statewide with an assessed tax value of less than $10,000. That means that, based on the data we've already shared, the cost of, fully retrofitting those units exceeds the actual value of the unit itself, which makes it really unlikely that anyone is going to put, the cost to make these homes able to use less fossil fuels. In addition, in manufactured home communities, many of them have homes that are in flood zones, and it's very difficult and costly to move those to other sites and pour a new slab and things like that on the site. So we think that there's a substantial portion of Vermont's manufactured home or mobile home housing stock that simply cannot be invested in to really reduce fossil fuel use. Mobile home replacement is happening to a degree in the state through state-funded programs, through housing funders, and it is an eligible use under the Clean Heat Standard. However, it's going to be really expensive to replace a whole unit compared to other things you might do. So we don't expect that obligated parties are going to choose to invest in that activity sort of beyond what's already happening at a state level that they can sort of latch on to purchase credits on the market. So that's a big concern about what to do about our aging mobile home stock and how to sort of bring that along in the carbon transition. The final report has a lot of detail on a lot of these challenges and a lot of recommendations where we sort of outlined which programs would be necessary to target these individual groups and deal with some of the problems like the split incentive and the unique technical challenges of mobile homes. Act 18 states that the Clean Heat Standard shall be designed and implemented to enhance social equity by prioritizing customers with low income, moderate income, those households with the highest energy burdens, residents of manufactured homes, and renter households with tenant-paid energy bills. The design shall ensure all customers have an equitable opportunity to participate in and benefit from clean heat measures regardless of heating fuel used, income level, geographic location, residential building type, or homeownership status. I think the EAG report finds that without sort of additional intervention, without other programs beyond what's already being done, the households that we just described are going to struggle to benefit from the Clean Heat Standard while experiencing a disproportionate share of those costs. The EAG report found that sustained investments, substantial investments in companion programs will be necessary to ensure an equitable implementation of the Clean Heat Standard. As I described, there's a lot of different suggestions of programs and policies that could, sort of move the needle on what we're already doing. But this requires looking beyond measures that are tied directly to emissions reductions, and instead meeting Vermont households where they are and understanding holistic challenges in affordably heating homes without fossil fuels. In particular, home repair funding and assistance in navigating the complex incentive systems we have are going to be essential to encouraging widespread adoption of clean heat technologies across demographic groups. The EAG felt that this really goes beyond what's in front of us in the Clean Heat Standard, and any programs that we have now and any subsequent suggestions that might be made in terms of how to deal with our Global Warming Solutions Act obligations are going to hit these walls where we have structural challenges to reaching our most vulnerable households and our lowest income households. Vermont needs to reevaluate how it has historically approached investments in emissions reductions and dismantle systematic barriers to reaching disadvantaged communities so that we can start ensuring that our inequitable status quo doesn't continue in the future, regardless of what we decide to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mia? Yes. that are
Just-
hard.
Thank you, Mia. That was a really great report. And I'm wondering, this is more of a question maybe for the chair, if you're willing to put your comments into, to submit your comments. You spoke really fast.
Oh, I'm
So I wasn't
sorry. I
able
was,
to- No, it's totally fine, but I would love to be able to read your testimony if possible.
I can try to clean it up. It's mostly just some unfinished phrases, but I think a lot of it is in our clean heat.
It's in the
Standard
report, yeah.
Yes, I
And,
really tried to summarize what we included.
Appendix A is the list of all the recommendations?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
that's helpful.
Yep.
But try your work.
Thank you. Any other clarifying questions? No? Okay. Oh, yes, Representative Tory.
Maybe not a clarifying question, but since you're here, I'm just curious, I was really listening closely to what you're saying about rental households. And I was wondering with our new housing study and needs assessment and things like that, do we anticipate more renters going to be, more rentals are needed, obviously, because more people are going to need to become renters because housing affordability is a really issue for homeownership. So I'm just, do we have a sense of how much our rental inventory needs to expand in Vermont?
Yeah, so my agency, Vermont Housing Finance Agency, helped the Department of Housing and Community Development produce it. I'm not sure off the top of my head the breakdown between expected renter and homeowner demographics. Vermont has a very high homeownership rate compared to other states, so we'll see how that sort of trends over the next couple decades. Yeah, I mean, I think the state has invested more of its resources into rental housing just because that can be a little bit more straightforward, but certainly Vermont is also doing investments in homeownership as well through some of the HFA and other programs. So yeah, I mean, I think also the housing stock is really porous. You know, a lot of our renters, I think it's about a third, live in single family homes. So I think it will be hard to sort of disentangle which is going to be a permanently rental home and which is going to be a permanent home ownership. And I think it speaks to the delivery mechanisms of how we do efficiency programs, like I said, with the split incentive challenge. But overall, I think our whole housing stock is going to need to be touched at some point to decarbonize effectively.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, super. Thank you so much. So grateful for your work. All right, and so now we'll invite up Rick Weston. And yeah, from the Technical Advisory Group.
Good morning. And thank you for having me here. My name is Rick Weston, Frederick Weston, on the documents that you'll be reading. I am the chair of the Technical Advisory Group. It's a 15-member group like the Equity Advisory Group, created by statute. And it consists of a diverse membership of folks who are, well, I'll say it again, with diverse interests and deep experience and expertise in the matters that we were charged with. Here to take any of your questions, happy to talk to you about what we've done. There is a report that's been submitted. It's attached to the PUC's report, which you just, as you heard from Ed, came out at 11 o'clock last night, which I've been speed reading while this discussion's been going on. The report that I wrote for that, for the PUC's report is a short report, just tells you what we did, the things that we touched on, and it follows the statutory requirements that we had that defined our tasks. Happy to talk about any of those details, and I can touch on some of them here. On substance, I can't speak for the TAG. The documents that we've written a number of them and submitted to the PUC, speak for themselves on specific technical matters associated with the design and implementation of the Clean Heat Standard. I have my own observations on some of these matters. I'm happy to share them with you as a private citizen and one whose career has been dedicated to energy and environmental regulation and policy. And if I may, just take a moment to give you some of my background. For many of you, I have not yet had the honor of meeting. I am a former economist and hearing officer with the Vermont Public Service Board, what we used to call the PUC. In those roles, I was intimately involved in all of the PSB's major energy and telecommunications dockets between 1989 and 2000. At the end of 1999, I left the PSB to join a small organization called the Regulatory Assistance Project. At the time, there were 4 of us, well, 5, actually. RAP had been established in 1992 to fulfill a unique role. It was funded by US EPA, US DOE, and private foundations. That role being to provide advisory service to energy and environmental policymakers and regulators around the country as states began to address the economic, environmental, and equity challenges that were and still are facing our network energy industries. This was a time we were coming right out of the nuclear crisis, the nuclear debacle, the high costs of nuclear facilities, and states, and Vermont was a leading one in this respect, states around the country were developing new public processes, planning and public processes to make long-term resource decisions that would meet the demand for energy services at least cost over the long run. And our statutes speak to that. And they are, in that respect, amongst the earliest adopted by states here in the United States, obviously, and have proven remarkably successful in driving cost-effective, environmentally sustainable energy resource decisions. Well, I applaud the legislature for adopting those rules and regulations. When I joined RAP as a director at the end of 1999, there were, as I said, 5 of us in the organization. When I retired in September of 2023, there were over 40 of us deployed in regional programs around the world. For about 10 years, I ran our Asia programs, China and India. Spent a lot of time in Asia. I also worked extensively in the US and Europe. I've written extensively and spoken extensively on environmental and economic matters in the electric sector. Among them, many of the things that you'll be hearing about from your colleagues at the Public Utilities Commission and at the Department of Public Service. Rate making, rate design, long-term planning, performance-based regulation, and market design for meeting electricity needs. I had the, pleasure, honor of participating in the design and development of, among other things, output-based emission standards for small-scale generation facilities. We developed a model rule that was adopted in whole or part 7 states, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, power sector emissions trading programs in China, and some revised rules of electricity system operations. I say this all by way of just saying, letting you know how lucky I feel I've been in my career to have had the wide range of experiences and to have learned the things that I've been able to learn and work with people that are dedicated to making sure that our energy systems, as I say, meet demand for energy service at least cost over the long term and with the least in the way of environmental damages. And I just also note that I was the co-author of 3 reports at least, one in 2008, another in 2011, and the last one in 2019, that made recommendations, proposed approaches for addressing thermal efficiency in Vermont. I have an attachment to the issue, I guess. Okay. The purpose of the tag is set out in statute. There are 12 tasks given to the tag. 10 of them are listed in one section, 2 others in other sections. You'll see I've identified those in the report that's attached to PUC's report. They have to do with indeed technical issues. Some of the more arcane ones having to do with the carbon intensity of various clean heat measures, with the sequencing of both process and substantive decisions. Let's see, public health impacts, economic impacts of certain kinds of measures, what kinds of measures would produce cost savings for consumers, which ones might not, that sort of thing. And I do want to say that that the work of the EHE, I think, has been terrific, and we kept in regular contact with them and tried as much as we could to have our work informed by theirs. We spoke to the PUC on a number of issues, including credit ownership. Chair McNamara talked about that. Advanced wood heat, the definition of advanced wood heat that we thought should work for the clean heat standard. Again, carbon intensities of wood measures and others. And as I said, public health considerations. That, in fact, was our last, most recent action, was identifying where we think there are public health benefits and negative impacts from various clean heat measures. And what it really calls for is more work on this, because there is, in certain cases, an absence of scientific research on some of these measures, in particular cordwood stoves. EPA is working on that. We also engaged directly with the consultants for the PUC and the Department of Public Service. The PUC's consultant was, Opinion Dynamics, was tasked with developing the technical reference manual, which would be the basis for the acquisition of measures and determination of the value by obligated parties. So that's where all the mechanics really lie. And with the Department of Public Services consultant, NV5, who performed what you've heard of as the potential study. What is the potential for achievement? We engaged, as I say, directly and extensively with both of those consultants. And it's in those discussions, perhaps, that the collective expertise of the TAG was perhaps put to its highest use. We gave them extensive feedback on several iterations of the TRM, the Technical Resource Manual, and on the potential study. And I think that I know for a fact that those discussions led to adjustments, modifications, revisions of their work that I believe improved it. Now, TAG members and the consultants didn't always see eye to eye. That wasn't, of course, necessary. It was in that discussion that progress was made. It was true as well of the TAG members ourselves, as you can imagine. We often did not see eye to eye. But that's neither surprising nor proof of failure. As I say, it's this clash of ideas, the dialectic out of which some good work really emerged. And that, of course, is the process that you engage in on a daily basis. For my own part, I think that we were successful in this regard. We did not get as far as perhaps we'd wanted on certain issues, among them the carbon intensities of bio and renewable fuels and advanced wood heat. But absent changes in the law, the TAG's work doesn't end with the submission of the PUC's report, checkback report today in the draft rule. The process for the TAG and for the clean heat standard as a whole is meant to be iterative and open-ended. And as the state gains experience with the clean heat standard and we learn more about how clean heat measures actually reduce emissions, I have every reason to think that we can continue to provide the input and advice to the PUC as it develops, useful, important, I really want to emphasize, input and advice to the PUC as it develops and implements an effective and I want to emphasize this, and least cost thermal emissions program. I can't emphasize this enough. The legislature has set targets through the Global Warming Solutions Act for reductions in emissions. The question that you're facing and that the PUC is facing and we as a society as a whole face is how to meet those targets at least cost, with least economic disruption, and in fact, with as much economic benefit as possible for the citizenry, the homes and businesses of Vermont. So this is a least cost question over the long term. How do we do this best? And it's in that discussion that I think that's where we need to focus. And I look forward, if I can, in helping you work through those concerns. If I can make some general observations about where we stand and where I think we can go. Vermonters spend roughly $1 billion a year on fossil heat, and most of that money goes out of state. The goal of the Affordable Heat Act, I think our shared objective, is to lower the cost of heating for Vermonters. I really want to emphasize this, as I just said, and that means least cost over the long term. What we know from experience and repeated analysis is that the best way to lower heating costs for Vermonters happens also to be the one that minimizes GHG emissions. This is true of end-use efficiency in the electric and natural gas sectors. It's true of renewables and demand flexibility. And the analytics tell us that it's true of clean heat measures. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy and that there aren't challenges, but the long-term view is, in my view, economically positive. Reducing emissions and reducing costs are not alternative, mutually exclusive choices. In my view, they are the same choice. Today, the average price of fuel oil yesterday in Vermont is 6 cents lower per gallon than it was in July. It's 30 cents lower per gallon than it was a year ago, and it's $2 less per gallon than its high in November of 2022. Consigning Vermonters, especially those amongst us who are most vulnerable to continued dependence on fossil fuels, seems to me be a failure to see the forest for the trees. I think the status quo is unsustainable. It certainly seems to me clear that affordable heat is a central component of affordable housing. The work that you are tasked with this session is extraordinarily challenging. But I think they go together, and I really want to emphasize that. And again, if there's anything I can do to help the committees think this through, I'd be more than happy to. Cost, of course, is only one side of the equation. Chair McNamara made this point, others have as well. Savings and benefits are on the other. I have not yet had a chance to look in detail through the PUC's economic impacts analysis. I'd be happy to come back and chat about it after I have a chance to review it. Others from the TAG, from the public, from the PUC, the DPS, you should hear from them all, as Chair McNamara said. I'd recommend that you hear from one of the TAG members, Ken Jones, who's worked extensively on these matters. He has given a great deal of thought to these questions. What we know from our experience with end-use efficiency, it's been a very successful experience, is that we all know this, there's a trade-off between capital and operating costs. And it almost always happens that that upfront investment is necessary to achieve total cost savings, total cost reductions. Okay, that exceed. I'm not saying this properly. Let me say it again. Upfront investment is necessary to achieve cost savings, total cost savings that exceed and often greatly exceed total costs, benefits that exceed costs. We don't do it with that. That's the reason we do it, right? Is to minimize cost. And it's almost always the case that we do this through upfront capital investment. And that's, of course, one of the challenges associated with the Clean Heat Standard. And then there, of course, are co-benefits associated with the work. The chief amongst them are potential public health benefits from improved building envelopes and improved heating systems. That said, I acknowledge that there is uncertainty. There are, after all, few facts about the future. The cost assessments that have been done for the Clean Heat Standard vary significantly. One of the things that I know you will be considering, and I think it's quite sensible, is that, and in effect, Chair McNamara referred to this, it's entirely reasonable to consider a near-term cost cap for the program. Okay. Chair McNamara talked about setting credit prices, administrative. This has been a recommendation of a number of members of TAG, that starting with a known amount and then engineering your budgets and your savings estimates from that makes a good deal of sense, certainly to start. Okay, just a couple more thoughts, if I may. I want to talk a little bit about the notion of performance standards. The Clean Heat Standard is a performance standard. Okay, the purpose is to obviously achieve a desired public policy goals at total lowest cost. Again, I can't emphasize that enough, which it does by giving obligated parties flexibility in how to meet the obligations. Okay. That flexibility gives obligated parties an opportunity to achieve their goals more cheaply, more inexpensively than they might otherwise. And in fact, in certain cases, to make money from doing so, to be rewarded for superior performance. So I would encourage you, anytime you think about targets and goals and objectives, to frame them in a way that give the obligated entities that opportunity. It's in that incentive that creative, innovative solutions to problems emerge. And again, we've seen this certainly in renewable energy, but also in efficiency in other places. And certainly at the federal level, all the work done on compliance standards has driven remarkable cost savings and innovations in appliances. And they were done in such a way that people had a chance to make money on them. You recall, I guess it was called the Golden Carrot Program for quite a while. Fuel efficiency standards as well have worked that way. And I would only just add, just one other thing is that Vermont has had a long and successful history of performance regulation, both in telecommunications and in electricity through the alternative regulatory mechanisms amongst some of us refer to as decoupling and cost sharing on the power cost side work very well and have achieved real cost containment. I feel that doing nothing would be imprudent of us. We know what's needed. This is hard. It's not a reason not to do it. In fact, that's the reason to do it. In fact, other jurisdictions, cities, Boulder, Colorado, states, you heard Massachusetts, New York, Maryland are all moving in this direction. The Netherlands are all taking action. The longer we wait, the more difficult this is going to be and the more costly it's going to become. We need to start. We can start modestly, but we need to start. I really encourage you to move in that direction. And a well-designed clean heat standard or thermal sector program can do this. So with that, I can stop here. I've got some points I could make about where some tweaks might be made. I'm happy to take your questions or as you see fit. I certainly would be happy to come back at a later date when you're rolling up your sleeves and thinking about what needs to happen to chime in, but I've got some preliminary thoughts now if you'd like.
Well, let's see if there are any questions at this point. Did you have
I
something?
had one other.
Go for it, yeah.
One other thing, I failed to do what I need to do, which is, I really need to commend the work of the technical advisory group. These folks dedicated many professional and personal hours to the work. They engaged in it with enthusiasm, respect, intellectual rigor, and a real belief that smart, well-designed public policy is it's critical to meeting the goals that the state has set for itself. And while we, as I say, we didn't always agree, we made, I think, some really important progress. I hope we were able to help the PUC as it struggled with some of these issues. But the folks on the tag were terrific, and I just can't speak highly enough of them, nor can I speak highly enough of the facilitator who ran the program for us. I mentioned that in the report. So,
Thank you. Any questions for Rick? Okay. Great. Yes.
Nobody
Rev-
else is going to ask.
Yeah,
questions.
Rev Campbell, go ahead.
I'm interested in recommendations you might make that you didn't get into.
Just a couple of quick points. I've said one, no delay, start right away. We've got to move. It may make sense to smooth the curve. 2030 targets are looming right ahead of us, and they're pretty ambitious. I think it's reasonable to consider possibly smoothing that early curve for emissions reductions. That's what I'm referring to. I'm sorry. You know, the targets for emissions reductions.
Wait, smooth the curve means
Reduce the targets in the early years. That's, I know that's controversial, but I'm trying to be practical. I think it's going to be very difficult to meet those targets. I think there's
by 2030, say.
by 2030.
Okay.
And I think that there might be some smoothing that can be done.
Okay, I just wanted to understand.
No, thank you. And I haven't given it much more thought than that at this point. Any program that's intended to remove a bad or mitigate a bad, in this case emissions, will be most effective if the producer of that bad pays for it. So polluter pays, that's the expression. Polluter pays, but that's how this is designed, that the parties who are responsible for emissions are the ones who are obligated to take action to reduce them. I think you have heard some good points. You'll hear them from Matt Cota. You've heard them already from Chair McNamara about simplifying who the obligated parties should be. I agree with those. I like the idea of certainly in the early years setting a price. Might be called an alternative compliance mechanism, but set a cap on the program, but do it in a way that, again, allows the obligated parties opportunities to find cheaper ways to meet the goal. Okay, so that means they need to have skin in the game. They still need to have the obligation on them, as opposed to merely paying a fee and walking away and not having any obligation to do anything. No, you want them to have skin in the game. I think they want to have skin in the game because, again, you know, there are actors out there who may find ways to perform very well and in fact can make money by doing so, by helping others meet their obligations. That's the idea of these things. So you want them to have that incentive. Let's see. You will have to contend with your targets. Targets increase. The targets increase, the obligations necessarily increase. So they're going to have to be escalators in the program. Now, very likely include escalators on the price cap that is set. I was deeply involved in the design and development and creation of Efficiency Vermont when I was with the Public Service Board. The services that EVT provide are ones that the utilities in the state are legally obligated to perform. Efficiency investments are part of a least cost plan for meeting demand for energy service. Under our statutes, 218D, if I can remember, it's been a while, one of them, there's a least cost planning and performance statute that requires the utilities to do this work. We found that for a number of reasons, it made more sense in Vermont to move that work to a separate entity. This, I think, was innovative. It's been copied around the country and around the world, in other parts of the world. It makes a lot of sense. It's a mission-driven, single-purpose utility in that sense. But what it's doing is it's performing a service that the utilities are themselves obligated to perform. And that means it's part of the cost of service of utilities and part of the regulated service. And it's all within the requirements of Title 30. And as I say, the cost of service of regulated utilities. Funds raised for a thermal efficiency program don't come out of the same logic necessarily. And we're talking about unregulated companies. I would encourage you to think about if you're going to put a fee on dollars per gallon, some kind of fee on fuel oil, fossil fuels to fund parts of this program. Again, let me just go back. For those obligated parties who find a cheaper way to do it, they would have reductions in that fee that they would have to pay. I mean, that makes sense. I get that. You might want to think about how best to do that. I'm not sure you want to put that through appropriations every year. I'm going beyond my remit and my knowledge, but that'll be a challenge. It seems to me, is managing that fee. But other than that, I'll stop there and happily come back and chat at another time.
We have a couple of questions.
Did I go too far?
Sorry, yes, Rep. Sabrina, go ahead. Sure.
Great, thanks, Rick. This is great. I have a question. You talked about smoothing the curve. Another concept that I talked about with some folks was really just about disconnecting from the obligations. And I'm wondering if you can offer, if you've thought about that, if you can offer any comments on the potential pros or cons of that. This is, as we know, a market mechanism. So, there's opportunity here for the companies that are transitioning their businesses to meet the changing economy. And so have you had any time to think about that?
Let me see if I understand. Are you suggesting that, as you say, disconnecting, in other words, relieving a clean heat program from meeting GWSA targets itself?
Yeah. Just to kind of get it started as a supportive mechanism. Again, this is a concept I have not gone far in and have talked with a few others about it, but is it something you've thought about?
No, I haven't given it specific thought, but it seems to me that even if you are, and I don't, I've said it, if you are talking about smoothing the curve, in effect, you are talking about some sort of disconnection. From at least your earlier targets, but entirely disconnected. I hadn't thought about that. I wouldn't want to. I'd be careful about that. I mean, we do have goals that we want to meet, and these the clean heat standard or a clean heat program of some sort or another will be a part of meeting those goals. How much of the goals it should meet, that's a question that sure you can ask yourselves and we can think about. And others will have, I think, more insights on this than I, at least at the moment. Forgive me.
Thanks. Thank you. Representative Denise.
Thanks. I think you read my mind. I wanted to clarify something that Chair McNamara mentioned earlier, and I should have asked at the time, but so if I'm understanding correctly, and I hope I am, the clean heat standard is sort of it's dialed all the way up to meet our 2030 GWSA goals. And I wonder what percentage, or if we have a sense of how much of our thermal reduction load the clean heat standard as currently designed is carrying right now. Does that make sense? I think Chair McNamara mentioned there are other programs that we're counting on to get this and that work done, but is clean heat standard as you all designed it expected to be achieving 80% of our 2030 goals, 100%?
The potential, you should take a look at the potential study by the department, and there are problems with that study. We can
Yeah.
talk about that another time. There are some concerns I have with how costs and savings are measured, but that potential study was performed, as I recall, to see what would be necessary in the way of thermal sector emissions reductions to meet our Global Warming Solutions Act targets. So the answer to your question is, in that sense, yes, it's dialed up to meet, so it would be, at least analytically, that was what we were looking at. There are obviously concerns with that, given timing and potential costs of that. The current programs under Efficiency Vermont and Tier 3 are eligible to, under the current Act 18, are eligible to acquire their work, their savings, produce clean heat credits. Okay. So in that sense, they're subsumed under an umbrella called the clean heat standard.
I see. Okay. So they're included in there
Yeah. They would be
already.
the business as usual. You'll see,
Right.
they talk about the business.
Got it.
So the way, as I just very quickly took a look at the PUC's economic study, they've got business as usual, what's expected under the current programs, and what in addition needs to happen. But together they're all eligible to create clean heat credits.
Yes, Representative Cutler.
You. One of my big concerns as we talk about all this is that the process of transitioning homes is going to take a long time. And as we heard, low and middle income homes are likely to be last. There are people who will be buying heating oil for the next 15 years, maybe the next 20 years, for a long period of time. Is there an approach that you're aware of to designing a mechanism in the thermal sector in which polluters pay that doesn't raise the cost of heating oil for low and moderate income homes over the 15 or 20 years it will take until those homes are converted?
Not on the thermal sector, but a number of programs. Let me think about this. There'll be others who, again, will know. OEO, you should talk. They may have some thoughts about this, but I'm trying to recall now actually programs that we had in the telecommunications side that were that there were income eligibility or ineligibility required. In other words, you didn't have to pay certain fees as a consequence of. I just have to recall offhand. I don't recall. It seems to me that something could be done that we could design such a program. Seems to me that there'd be a way of doing it. Then there are real challenges to it, no question. But I think we can do it. And let me leave it at that. I would turn back to Mia for this in fact, but I'll give that some thought. And if I come up with any examples, I'll send them to you right away.
Thank you very much.
Gladly.
Yes.
I'm a little confused. A gallon of fuel oil, given efficiencies and whatever, have so many BTUs or therms or whatever they're measured in. How does this energy that's being displaced by not selling or using fossil fuels get equated to the demand on the electric structure if we're looking per se at a one-on-one?
Well, if I replace my propane oil heating system with heat pumps, you're absolutely correct. I won't be having trucks delivering fuel for me to use on demand whenever I want it, right, from my tank. Now I'll be demanding electricity to run my heat pumps and deliver the heating services. A BTU of heat provided by my propane system will not require the same BTU of electricity, however. And the reason it does is because I'm not converting when I demand electricity to run my heat pump, I'm not converting that electricity into heat. I'm moving heat from outside the house into the house. And that coefficient of performance, as it's called, is actually, it's a multiple of the BTUs. So in that sense, I'm using fewer BTUs from the electric system than I would be from fuel oil or propane or whatever. The question that I think you might be getting at, if I can anticipate, is how do we manage our electric system? How do we invest? How do we think about resource needs and distribution and transmission system investment in light of an increased load on the system to meet heating? That's an important question and challenging one, but one that we can do.
Yeah, I think
Did I misunderstand?
No, I intended my question not to be, I misspoke on a BTU per BTU. I think there's the efficiency has to be in that calculation somewhere. It's just not a straight guns and butter. And
Yeah, right.
I may have asked it that way, but I didn't intend it. It's the additional load on the electric system required to get the therms, the BTUs between the use of electricity and the acquiring it from the outside source of the energy that's already there, the heat exchanger.
Right, there will be, forgive me again, if I'm misunderstanding, there will absolutely be an increase in electrical needs for the system. How we meet them is a question of how we operate our system, how we can manage demand, how we operate our heat pumps, in fact. And I alluded to this only very tangentially earlier in the discussion. But yes, that's part of the long-term planning equation. And in fact, again, under Vermont law, our electric utilities are required to develop long-term integrated resource plans to tell us how they think they're going to meet demand for service over, as Ed said, Chair McNamara said, over a 20-year planning horizon. They very much should be planning for this changed future, this transitioning future. And we can see how the system is going to change and what we can do to actually improve its overall efficiency and utilization, asset utilization of the grid. This work is being done, throughout the country and in Europe as well. Texas actually has a very interesting record on this. I think those are solvable technical challenges that ultimately provide economic benefits.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Very much appreciate your testimony and sharing with us.
Thank you very much. And if I can be of any service or any member of the TAG, by all means, I encourage you to take advantage of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And so with that, we are done. So we're going to adjourn